Jazmín Morales, welcome. You are on mute.
Hi, everyone.
How are you doing? We're still waiting for people to arrive. We'll give it just another 60 or 120 seconds.
Excellent. How are you?
I am good. I am good. Although, hold on a second. I have to change the video on my screen. Doesn't seem to be picking up my actual camera. There we go.
Great.
All right, it is 12 o'clock, so we will get going. I'm sure people will be joining us as they finish up their lunch or begin it one way or another, at any rate. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Jonathan Neal. I'm the director of Center for Business and Management of the Arts at Claremont Graduate University, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Jazmín Morales to our conversation series today. Jazmín, excuse me, silence your cell phones if you haven't done that. Jazmín is, I think, first and foremost, a favored alum of our programs of arts management from a number of years ago and has served us very ably on our alumni board. But otherwise does a couple of things at the Colburn School of Music here in Los Angeles. And we'll have Jazmín talk a little bit about her background and what she is involved in. But first, Jazmín, how are you doing in quarantine? How are you faring during our shelter-in-place, safer-at-home orders of upwards of 2 months now?
Well, it's been quite a decade here in quarantine. It's been a journey. I feel like 2 months ago, life was completely different, obviously, but so was my outlook for how I was going to deal with this.
Right.
Yeah, so I think actually I've hit a turning point where I'm no longer holding on to that lofty vision of life becoming normal anytime in the next couple of weeks or couple of months. Like, this is really sunk in that it will be our reality for at least a year. And so trying to find my stride in that is becoming more exciting and less daunting.
I know it is. It does seem like over the last few weeks, there's been a kind of gradual turning point where even with the possibility of businesses opening back up, organizations putting their schedules back up, getting their seasons in order, thinking about what reopening looks like, I think we're all getting a taste that this is going to be a much longer road and a very different process. And in a way, it made the shutdown seem very easy.
Totally.
So tell us a little bit about how you are doing at the Colburn School and how the Colburn School itself is famous in this whole environment.
Yeah, well, Colburn, like any arts organization, has been challenged by this moment. Since we're a school, we're not faring quite as badly as many of the presenting houses throughout Los Angeles or the world at this point. But we're facing our own unique set of challenges around, especially in our conservatory where our students live on campus. It was quite a feat to get them out. It happened over spring break. And so, a lot of people ended up leaving stuff in the dorms. It was sort of like an abrupt sort of very abbreviated school year. And so, wrapping that up and being able to plan for another school year. I mean, we will have a better idea July 1 exactly what's going to happen. But I mean, if we're observing what's happening even in the Cal State system, or as schools start to announce one by one what fall will be, particularly online, having to readjust our budgets to reflect that, and planning for that. But actually, I've been so impressed and heartened by the just sheer speed with which we were able to get everything going online. I mean, within days, essentially, we started our semester all on remote learning. And our center has really played a big part of that, even if it's been, distributing gear to faculty, training them, many for the first time on Zoom, or, debating the finer points of audio lag on FaceTime versus, any other WhatsApp or any other video service. So, once we sort of got up and running, I was just so surprised by how things just continued, and the work continued to be there, and students were showing up, even though for some of them it was in the middle of the night, showing up for a lesson or a class from Australia or South Korea. So it's been okay. We did get and then give back a PPP loan, so
Right.
that's been an interesting process, just to conceive of what our staff capacity is and is going to be in the next couple of months. So, bracing ourselves for reality, but also, I think, holding on to some optimism that students are going to continue to learn music, even if it is virtual for now.
Right. And so how is your particular position? I mean, as manager of community engagement, how have you seen what you were doing 3 months ago now transform into what the school has needed today?
Well, I mean, since the Center for Innovation and Community Impact is sort of a dumping place for all sort of miscellaneous needs and ideas that arise in the school, and so it's constantly shifting. Our work is always sort of aggregating, and so in this moment, it's really been focused on helping faculty who have only ever taught in person make the transition onto online learning, but also we teach out of our center, and so I've had to transition all of my classes onto the online space. And actually, this semester I joined the Faculty of the Arts Leadership Program at USC, which also, of course, went virtual. And so, we had a week head start at USC because they did a practice run, essentially, not
Right.
knowing that we wouldn't ever come back from the practice run. And so, getting that sort of deep intro and getting the practice, and just rolling right into the implementation of that has been, we've been sort of the FAQ center for the school.
Sure. The testing ground. That's
Yeah,
very
the testing
interesting.
ground.
So what, I mean, if you can share something, what's worked and what hasn't worked? Have there been some experiments that you found have been fairly successful, and so you've continued with them? And there's some things that you tried which were like, oh my, this is not gonna function, so we've got to jettison and try something different?
Yeah, for us, it was this year, actually, this academic year, we piloted a series of micro courses, so quarter unit credit classes that split up a couple of 3-unit sort of bigger commitment classes that were just cumbersome and not really suited for the sort of schedule flow of students as they were going through their degree programs. And so we, to much success, piloted this concept of the micro courses that could be taken over a long weekend, or virtually, in which Colburn hadn't really previously offered. And so really leaning into that model and just moving all of those courses online and making them asynchronous has been increasingly successful for us. Just especially because we have students who are accessing from all over the world, who can't really
Sure.
get on the same timeline. And so now it's a matter of building the most beautiful content and perhaps building something out for a broader audience outside of just our students, because it's now much easier to share it.
Sure, that's amazing. And how I know that a lot of the conservatory activity is a lot of one-on-one instruction, right? I mean, a lot of students playing with their faculty and a lot of practice in that environment. How was that shaped up during this sort of distance period of time?
Well, I think that's actually what's keeping us afloat right now. The fact that it is just one-on-one exchange, and we're not trying to coordinate too many like I mean, we are trying to coordinate some performances, but that one-to-one exchange is easier to maintain in this environment as opposed to a lot of
Right.
group learning. However, the other side of that experience for conservatory students is playing in a gigantic orchestra, which is,
Right.
the opposite of that one-on-one experience, and frankly dangerous at this moment in time. And so being able to provide a performance experience is going to be challenging in this moment. We did do one performance at the end of the year. Every week we gather on Thursday afternoons as a Colburn community for a performance forum. We're chosen. It's sort of like the Hunger Games, how people get chosen for this Thursday forum. And so it's a sacred Colburn tradition, and we had the opportunity to put together a forum at the end of the year in honor of our graduates, and just thinking out all these a cappella videos that were recorded one-on-one in their house, and trying to shape them into chamber music or small ensembles, and just how gravely lacking it is. And though it's fun to put tunes together, and of course if it's an excerpt of Frozen, it's really fun to watch and listen to, but it's not quite that same experience of playing a Beethoven string quartet when you're not in the same room or on the same continent. So just really missing those moments, but also anticipating how grateful we will feel for them after this.
So I've got a question about how the students are embracing some of this. So, I mean, I imagine some of them must be really grabbing hold of recording technology and sharing clips and becoming more adept at kind of editing even their own material, their friends' material, and putting things together. Have you seen a bunch of that activity? That's just an assumption that I would have, and I don't know if that was going on beforehand. I assume it probably was, but maybe now it's really taken off in a new direction.
Yes, I'm seeing more of it slowly but surely as people just get brave about putting their experiments out there. And certainly behind the scenes, we're getting a lot of inquiries from students like, where can I start? Hey, I know you've been trying to get me on this on this train for a couple of years at Colburn, but I'm finally ready to take the plunge and put my work out there. So yes, absolutely. I think the appetite is growing for that. And so will the need for, the right gear and the right software to help them make the best possible content. And so that's what we're really working on getting to them now.
Yeah. So like most academic institutions, I'm obviously a creature of one of those as well. Have you seen similarly with, I think this was a brave new world for a lot of faculty and a lot of people who hadn't otherwise been working in an online space or working with any kind of distributed education before, right? There was the way that they've probably been teaching for the last 25 or 30 years, and that's just the way that they always thought that they were going to teach, and it's very much about in person and everything else. Have you seen this a little bit more of an embrace now that everybody is in this together, and people who never thought that they would be on Zoom technology or on Facebook Live or whatever, well, all of a sudden deciding, hey, I'm gonna jump in with both feet, and hey, this is actually kind of interesting, and maybe I should have done this before. Is there that level of kind of fear of the unknown breaking away and getting people more enthusiastic about the capacities for the technological environment and the way that music and music instruction happens?
I've definitely seen a range in responses, because there have certainly been those faculty who's like, oh, I didn't realize this was so easy, or I did FaceTime works great. I don't know why I wasn't trying this before, and who are expanding their studios now and who are really running with it. And then those who are still like, this will never work, who are having their students send them gigantic files of just video so they won't have to, that sort of thing.
Right. Printing out all their emails and reading them, reading them by hand.
Yeah, the entire email is written in the subject line when they're asking for help. So definitely been a range, but I would say the vast majority were already doing this, especially, in our conservatory. A lot of our faculty are working with, people from all over the world at any given time. And so this was just very second nature to them, but certainly in the community school, a lot of, community music teachers who have been working in schools and that sort of thing, it's just not as common. And so the transition's been a bit different for them.
So what is the best platform that the school has found for doing this kind of remote instruction and remote playing?
Right now, we recommend FaceTime first, just because the audio is better. But all of our group classes are still happening on Zoom. So,
wow.
So there are ensembles still meeting via Zoom. And even our early childhood classes are meeting on Zoom. So all the babies are getting on at 10 o'clock on Tuesdays for their music class. And it's been fine. Just even our dance academy obviously has gone onto Zoom, and they've been very creative in terms of how they have synchronized their just teaching methods, having like, okay, because there's someone giving feedback, there's always an accompanist, and then there's the actual teacher, and so synchronizing them onto one platform that can then be streamed onto Zoom. It's been complicated, but really interesting to see how it's evolved over the past couple of weeks too.
That's amazing.
Yeah, more sophisticated now.
That's right. I'm sure. It's like everyone's like, okay, you are muted. Video is on. This person's got their microphone on. It's going to pick up both voices. It's going to stream through Zoom. All of that is going to be very very interesting. I got to imagine and I got to imagine there are a ton of opportunities out there now too for plugins to these various different systems that are going to be, ways to tailor to these specific types of environments, right? I mean, you got to imagine not just, music and art schools are gonna need higher quality audio transmission, almost just as much bandwidth as video. I don't even know what the technology is, but I can imagine that within the next, 6 months to 12 months, we will see, even once this is passed, a bunch of interesting things that all of a sudden get pitched to these organizations to say, hey, like, we heard your cries 6 months ago, and look what we've got. Look what you can do here, right? Like,
totally.
easy coordination, very easy syncing, all sorts of kinds of things, programs that really help do that. I mean, that could be very promising.
Absolutely.
Have you seen any other experiments or other arts organizations or other arts leaders that you've been paying attention to, which you've taken note of and have either adopted or thinking about yourself?
As the conservatory presidents meet like once a week every Monday, and so they're always in constant communication. It's hard to know like who's really coming up with anything new because it all feels like a collective idea at this point. But in terms of other organizations, I've actually Carnegie Hall recently launched an early childhood program called, I think, Big Note, Little Note, for parents who are staying home with young kids. And it's definitely something that an audience that we serve at Colburn in our early childhood training. And so just like being able to see how they set that up in a way that is so broadly public facing has been, informative for us to think about how we might want to begin building that sort of content for ourselves.
Yeah. I've got a hint. Make it an application on an iPad that a 5, 6, 7, or 8-year-old can operate by themselves.
So remove the parents.
All of these organizations are doing great work. They're producing all of this great content for parents to homeschool their children, and all the parents are trying to hold down their regular careers, and they just want, they want to know that their children are consuming high culture and having great, experiences in the arts through these online platforms, but they don't want to be the one having to deliver it.
Absolutely. Totally.
Yeah, which is, in that context, it feels like Netflix Kids is going to win out every time.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. And I've just, the others, so I'm actually working with Deborah Borda right now as a mentor through a fellowship program that I'm doing. And she was actually the sort of first alarm that sounded for me around coronavirus, because her and I had an email exchange in like February, and she was like, I'm very, worried about this thing. We're trying to cancel our tour. And I'm just like, what? This, like, I don't think it's going to be that bad. Like, she must be crazy. And of course, she was the canary in the coal mine around that, and has just been so, I think, proactive and visionary around her leadership in this moment. And I think actually she was just elected to New York City's Arts and Culture Defense or Response Fund. Mm-hmm. And, although she's had to cancel her season and do all of the unfortunate things that orchestras have had to do over the past couple of weeks, I think she's also been so thoughtful about providing words of optimism and hope that the arts and culture sector really need right now. In her piece in the Times, she talks about envisioning what it will feel like when we re-enter the concert hall and wait for that first downbeat in a concert, and what that moment will feel like collectively for us. And that has just been something that I keep coming back to in the moments where I feel like it's never ending.
Yeah. So what do you think? I mean, you're a performer. You've been in orchestras, small groups, in all sorts of venues. So you've got a very good perspective on this. In your opinion, what and if you let's say that if you were in a position to make these happen, what would be your first couple of steps? How would you want to unfold bringing back some sort of collective in-person performance? Let's say, given a scenario of our current circumstances of, say, 6-foot social distancing and all the basic health and safety precautions that we know are kind of going to be there with us for a while.
Totally. Well, I think in predicting what we're already seeing in terms of as we transition back into normal life, what are the things that we may gravitate towards first? And I think for me, that's been like nature and outdoor spaces, and museums, oddly enough, where we also have space to be distant. And so thinking about putting music in those places when,
Right.
that allows us to keep safe distance from audiences, but also accomplishes something else, right? Of that same communal experience of a concert, of being able to do that in nature. And so I know like Chamber Music America did a big program in like outdoor rural spaces. And so we've really been in conversation with them about what does this look like in a
Right.
new iteration where, on a mass scale, we can put musicians out into nature and public spaces where other people are naturally going to be and begin those conversations there. Between artist and audience. So yeah, baby steps. The concert hall is just so far away, it seems,
Sure.
for now. So,
And so,
inching towards it.
yeah. I mean, I mean, it seems like there could be some amazing, again, kind of opportunities as you were talking. I imagine Dodger Stadium, right? With like, everybody's like every 6 seat is that what the seating is. So you go and it's like an all day thing because you've got your time tickets. So it keeps like very low density going in and going out. And and then it's the performers are stretched across the field and it's mic'd up and it's like, there's someone like the entire stadium is kind of filled and it's over the sound system and everything. It's like, that could really be amazing, right? I mean, it'd be like, it's like just even the thought of it is this like, gesture of support or this sort of this like imagined thing that could also be videotaped and all sorts of things would be sort of a fantastic kind of, quasi return, but also something you never would have seen before, right? Like something that never would have been able to take place given the circumstances. But, this wonderful way of occupying these public venues or these public spaces, as you mentioned, that hadn't been occupiable in quite that way before.
Totally. Or even occupying new online spaces in a different way. I had a student who proposed a final project of doing community engagement on Minecraft, like
Oh,
community
amazing.
performances, and like doing all and like Fortnite concerts and all of these like different ways that musicians can now participate in the online space in a live way that it feels almost a little more real than
Yeah. I love that idea. That's such a fantastic idea. Just
yeah.
especially having a 7-year-old, soon to be 8-year-old daughter who is expecting that Minecraft is going to be a present for her in her coming birthday. And so I'm like, okay, but only if you can engage in cultural activities on Minecraft or in
Exactly.
Fortnite.
Coming soon.
Yeah. Well, I imagine the makers of those games would be all for it because it just means more time on their games.
Totally.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are some of the other sort of innovative ideas that people have pitched forward on those things? I'm very curious. That's a great one. What are some of the other things that you've caught wind of that you think are sort of thinkable only in this current moment?
Well, one of the projects I'm working on right now for an NPR show called From the Top is we're doing a series of Zoom concerts for Seacrest Studios, which they produce closed circuit programming for children's hospitals.
Sure.
And they have just such a smooth handle on what it is to produce a live Zoom concert that allows kids to call in from their hospital rooms and ask questions of the performers and like, sing along or request a song, that sort of thing. And so we've been working to get young artists, which are not really common on this in the studio, to play for other kids and to, you know, begin conversations with them around healing. And I think especially in this moment, helping artists see themselves as, you know, what's now becoming really popular as second responders, right, to the crisis, who are going to be so utterly necessary as we enter the sort of second phase of this, which will inevitably come with a huge mental health crisis, and putting artists in positions to feel empowered to act in those moments in ways that are helpful and authentic and beautiful and unique. And, you know, whether that's, I know other sort of FaceTime Zoom concerts have happened in COVID wards in New York City, and those are arising more and more frequently. But, you know, anything that really positions artists as necessarily healers in this next phase, I think is really going to be important. And in fact, the California Arts Council has a gigantic grant that everyone I know has applied for at this point, which is like the Innovations and Intersections grant. And I think actually a lot is going to come out of that in this space. With, like, maybe it is that app or, you know, whatever sort of software that we're dreaming about here, but in a way that intersects with arts and wellness, which I think is really going to be a huge demand after this.
Oh, that's really amazing. And so is that a program that Seacrest Studios had been running already, just given the kind of lockdown nature of hospital environments anyhow? And so this is now just, you know, able to be taken off the shelf and expanded to our quarantine scenario?
Exactly. Yeah. So they were already sort of bringing in musicians from all over the place on Zoom, and so when this happened, it was easy to continue and to grow that programming for them. So it was a great connection for us.
That's amazing. Does Colburn itself have intersections into music and wellness and programs that they are sort of specifically gearing some of their students towards or some of their curriculum towards?
Right now, our partnership with Street Symphony has really sort of introduced that into the conversation at Colburn. Specifically last year, we did a big project with them at the Weingart Center, which is a transitional facility, and we were working with a group of lifers on parole every Wednesday morning in a which was essentially a meditation class, but it was facilitated by social workers, and essentially students were bringing in musical offerings to conversations that would sort of emerge spontaneously. And at the end, they did a collaborative concert, which was extremely beautiful. And participants in the program were live sketching and doing slam poetry over solo Bach. It was beautiful. And so Street Symphony has really provided such leadership for us around in that space, especially arts and wellness on Skid Row specifically, but in thinking about what that looks like in this next iteration, I think it's really something that we want to grow in our offerings as well.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that you're talking about Street Symphony, given that another one of our alums is now a manager over there. A big shout out to Vivo.
Yeah.
So are there other partnerships like that you've been working on? I mean, I think that this is probably going to be the coin of the realm going forward for arts organizations and other organizations, given what we know is going to be the challenges of the funding environment, the challenges of earned revenue and things like that, especially for performing arts organizations. So partnerships, collaborations, I think we'll probably see some mergers and other things of people coming together. What are some of the other partnerships that you've been working on specifically, or that Colburn's been putting into place?
Well, another close partnership is actually with this NPR show From the Top. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I described it to my husband as like the classical music Mickey Mouse Club, like all of the emerging young artists who go on to be gigantic megastars kind of go through this show. And many of them also go to Colburn. And so we have a lot of really natural points of intersection. And in thinking about what the future of both of our organizations look like, we've seen just so much alignment in our work and crossover in our students that we've just been partnering really closely. And in fact, 2 students on the taping for the Seacrest Studios performances are Colburn students. And so just really thinking about what direction we want to take that partnership in this new climate. And we do also have ongoing, actually very long partnerships going with the hospitals at USC, with senior centers in Hollywood and Pasadena, YMCA's, those like these community music venues that we're also trying to reimagine what continued partnership with them looks like in this digital age, how we can provide the resources that they need in order to continue to receive programming from us. So yeah, I think, and our funders are really interested in continuing to support those relationships. And that's also sort of the upside of the center is that we're basically entirely foundation funded, and many of our foundations really want us to continue this work and be innovative in this moment. And so we've gotten just so much support in terms of how we are reimagining all of these programs to continue.
Do you have a like one or two sort of pet projects or things that you've been thinking up in the background? I know you to be a particularly innovative and creative person, so I got to imagine that there are a couple things that have been simmering somewhere at the back of the stove. And so I'm curious to hear if there's anything you can share with us.
I mean, the pressure's really on because everyone's sort of looking for us and at us in this moment, like, okay, we're ready for your big, juicy, brilliant idea that's gonna just like make Colburn the shining star of the arts, and be like, I wish I would have thought of that sooner. And I feel like it's somewhere in me, but but just the sheer magnitude of having to like even rethink everything that we're doing up to this point, I feel like I'm at a loss for it. And then, and it's funny, I actually, when Carnegie Hall came out with that announcement, I sent it to our dean and I was like, they beat us to this. Like, why didn't we do this first?
Yeah.
And he was like, you forget that we live in a bubble of, where all of our ideas are something that is innovative to most other people already. So he calmed me down a little bit, but, only to say, I am in the process of cultivating that idea. And for me, it's been a lot of inner work, because the ideas that arise are all based in personal experience to some degree or another, whether it's from me or any of my colleagues. And so, in thinking about all of the challenging conversations that I've had with students over the past couple of weeks about what it means to be an artist right now and what the future of being an artist and that livelihood might look like, I think there's just so much internal investigation that's happening collectively that I hope will emerge in that big, juicy, brilliant idea.
How are the students feeling? I'm so curious.
It's not great. It's been really challenging for them. We had a really big graduating class this year as well, and so it was just so hard for them to lose out all of those final performances. This is peak competition season. All of the summer festivals are canceled, which is, literally inconceivable for any musician to think about a whole summer without a festival. And that is their livelihoods for many of them, winning the big competition dollars in the summer. And that's how they're able to float themselves through school. Not that they need to pay for Colburn, which is actually something that we didn't really talk about, but one thing that is also keeping us that it makes our situation a little different is that our conservatory is obviously funded by an endowment, which it feels increasingly like we're getting the pressure to draw from that endowment, especially in light of the changing requirements around all of the federal assistance that's happening. Only to say, I think they're also feeling uneasy about that. Like, oh, I know the stock market's in the tank, like, does that compromise anything about my scholarship? Like, are we gonna have to pay for school next year? Of course, that's not gonna be the case, but certainly that worry is weighing deeply on them. And also the worry of, do I even wanna go back to a music school where I'm pursuing a degree for an art form that may not be able to, keep food on the table for me in 2 years or whenever I graduate. So it's been really tough on them, and tough on us.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. And so, what have been your words of encouragement to those students, as well as to your colleagues and everybody else, about really being able to, even in your own moments of doubt, be able to provide that sense of confidence and forward looking and hope and everything else that I think everybody who works, in and around or adjacent to the arts and culture kind of has ingrained inside of them somewhere, but it's often easy to lose sight of it. What are some of the ways that you've been communicating, especially with the students? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, what I've said to many of them is, look at what is getting everyone through this moment. Everyone's turning on Netflix. Everyone's, streaming music to get them through the day. We're all consuming art so voraciously in this moment because we need it as a balm. And they know that what they offer as artists is so critical, and that the time will come back when they're able to provide it in a way that feels normal to them. But in the meantime, there are many things that they can and should be thinking about and experimenting with and doing, to not only grow their artistic practice, but to grow their impact as artists and provide a critical service in this moment.
Have you seen any kind of shift in the sort of mentality towards the for lack of a better word, the baked in value system of the artistic persona? I always get the sense that oftentimes a student who goes to conservatory has in their mind, first violinist on the stage in New York or at a European house, or a great solo career, or some of these things which we know, like, professional athletes or talents anywhere is a very difficult path to be able to attain. But it's often sort of the one that's held out there, right? It's the kind of myth that keeps everyone going as the very possibility. I get the sense, and I've sensed this within the visual art world and some other areas of the arts too, that some of that's been losing ground, right? I mean, of course, that's an ideal, but there's a little bit more of a sense of having a wider range of outlets, and success being defined not in terms of the sort of stellar solo career necessarily, but as creating a kind of robust, diverse range of activities and performance capacities. And I'm curious to hear if you've seen that happening, and if the last couple of months have provided a kind of realization along those lines that students might be pursuing new paths or feeling like they need to reassess some of the mythologies that keep us going.
Absolutely. This is actually something that I've seen change so much throughout my 4 years at Colburn. Certainly when I started, there was just still a big resistance. The program was relatively small. It was about 5 years old when I got there, but there was still a sort of resistance to participate in any of the work that we were doing because, not only students, but faculty primarily saw it as sort of frivolous and extra and
right. Secondary. It's just secondary.
Right. Of course.
Yeah.
And I think the first big shift came in the 2016 election, where we had a lot more students who were interested in using music as a tool for social justice and social change. And so that opened up a lot of avenues for us, but I'm certainly sensing another round of shift here. And especially around the mental health piece, because all of the things that have to happen in order for a student to get that concert master job in a top 5 orchestra is a series of small and large traumas. Conservatory training is
one long trauma.
Yeah, I mean, it's brutal. It's absolutely
right.
brutal on students, and what they have sort of seen as tough love or training has really slowly, I think, in our collective consciousness, has unearthed itself to be abuse and trauma.
Right.
And so in thinking about how much they're actually willing to tolerate before they get to that place, they'll usually shift their own path by then. But, helping them see that there are other ways of being musicians, that we can tap into their own authentic desires and help them build careers that encompass all of that and yet still keep them financially healthy. And so really helping them look at the big picture, rather than just this very narrow version of success, which, I have many students who win those orchestra jobs right as they're graduating, and then 2 years later emailing me, miserable, like, if I have to play Vivaldi one more time this season, I might actually just keel over and die. And they've only been there 2 seasons, sitting next to someone who's been there 36 years, right? And so, they often don't even understand what it means to have those jobs until they get there. And so helping them just build a toolkit of self-awareness, primarily of their own, of what they actually want to accomplish as artists, beyond just a product, but an impact, and then helping them find a way to do that is sustainable.
Is that, does that mean that music composition itself is becoming more sort of popular rather than just playing, but thinking that, you know, one of the ways to get beyond just having to play Vivaldi and over and over again is to be involved in the actual creation of the music that is going to engage a new generation of musicians and listeners. Whereas I think one of the things that we know from this world is that there is a generation that has supported this these environments, the orchestras and the chamber music and everything else that is, let's say, well past its expiration date. But I've got to think that part of that means that you have to have young, talented composers and writers and almost sort of the creative entrepreneurs who are coming out of these environments that are kind of, you know, recreating and resurrecting the ground that is going to bring in new audiences and new members.
Yeah, and I don't think it's so much that they themselves then, you know, pivot and become composers so much as they focus on uplifting the works of living composers and composers who embody their values, right? As composers, as full people, not just as representations of their artistic outlets, but what they actually stand for, what their music means in the world, and why it's worth performing in whatever context, right? As opposed to just selling another Beethoven 250 ticket.
Right. Right. Do you think that that's going to just, hands down, that's going to be a generational thing? Do you think it's just going to take, you know, another 5 years or 10 years, and we'll see a sort of the next generation that's just got a little bit different values, a little bit different tastes, a little bit different interests, to kind of allow, and maybe then just a little bit different funders and people who want to see different things on the stage?
Yes, I hope not, though. Like, I know people from older generations who are just so embracing of this work. And so it's hard for me to say, like, oh, you know, they're old, they just don't get it. It's more like they're old, they just don't want to get it, right? And so I think this moment is also just an invitation for all of us to reevaluate our version of success and where we are in this moment. And I hope that includes older people who are thinking about how the future of a tradition that they really care about is going to survive this. And it's not going to be by programming another season of Beethoven, right? And so
Right.
I think if we can welcome them when they're willing to, you know, embrace that change, then we might get there a little faster than if we just wait for them to die.
Right, right. I also, maybe the thing that this current pandemic makes us realize is that so much of the going to these performances is about the social environment, the social interaction. And it's not to say that the music is secondary, but it doesn't always have to be the standards and the same pieces of familiarity, because what you're looking for in the familiarity are the surroundings and the people who are there, right? And the social conditions that are being created, and the interactions and the enjoyment that's happening in that space. And the music doesn't have to be the precursor or the excuse for that, right? It doesn't have to be an entire season of Beethoven, or it doesn't have to be the same sort of stock classical or even otherwise, even sort of the stock sort of jazz favorites or entertainment that's going to bring people into their seats because it's got a more populist appeal. I think that if I had anything to hazard, I think that we are now going to realize how much we just want to be in those spaces, right? That we just want to be around those other people and realize what it means to have those experiences together. And then the diversity of those experiences will matter. Or the diversity of the music or the performance or the art that we're seeing will be what matters then, because the space itself will be the standard.
Totally.
Maybe. So for you and your own sort of, I mean, it's been a million miles a minute. I'm sure it's a lot of work somewhere inside. There's this brilliant idea that's going to come jumping out. But what have you sort of learned about yourself in this, as you've been locked down at home, as you've been dealing with your colleagues over video and your students and everybody else? What are some of the things that you've sort of realized about yourself or your own situation or your own values and the way that you've been interacting with people that you feel have been important and valuable to you?
Well, I've certainly learned, how much the physical environment that I'm working on influences me. It's at Colburn. My office is situated between all of the grad student piano practice rooms, and I joke a lot about how annoying they are when they, the top of the morning, it's like always etudes until like 3 o'clock, and then it's like clockwork, and I hate it. But without it, it feels like something's missing. Like I'm playing etudes on Spotify, like to try to simulate that experience and energy of being around students. And having them just waltz into my office, even though I hate it when I'm there. I miss being able to have a pickup conversation with a student and see how they're doing, because they're just so less readily available online. If I'm asking them on Zoom, like, oh, how are you doing, they'll be like, oh, I'm fine, but I know that if we were in my office, it would be a different conversation. But also, I think I'm just learning about my own resilience and capacity to live through apocalypse. Since last, I think July was when we had that series of earthquakes here in LA, and it was our first time experiencing them here in our apartment in Koreatown, where, as you'll see, we have lots of brick. And I just panicked, and since then had been having like apocalyptic earthquake anxiety, thinking like, oh my God, the big one's gonna hit at any moment, like it's gonna be the big one and the big one, and thinking about just how terrifying that would be. Not knowing that we would then live through a global pandemic, and it's actually not that scary, right? So even like when these scariest things that can possibly happen in our mind are playing out in front of us, they're not usually quite as bad as we make them out to be in our mind. And so I think that's helped me reframe some of my own inner anxiety around just living in this time that everything feels like it's apocalyptic and ending, and it's not actually quite that bad. And when I am able to ground myself in something normal, like cooking a meal or getting on my yoga mat, life goes on somehow.
Yeah, this has been an odd one in terms of something of the slow motion. I've spoken about this on a couple of these conversations, but the temporality of it is very odd. The weeks seem so much longer, right? The days seem so much longer, and yet in my mind, I'm not going anywhere, right? There's nothing that's like punctuating the various different meetings. I feel like I've got more actual capacity or time during the day to get things done. But it was just thinking back that 2 months is a decent amount of time, but I can't even remember, 3 weeks ago seemed like ages, right? And so much happens every week that it seems kind of extraordinary. And so these moments where you're like, well, I've got to take a step back, or just like make even an hour to sit down and read a book. I found that I've had a very hard time even finding those spaces of concentration, right? Yeah. And my mind is constantly drawn towards what's the next project that's got to get going, what's the next piece of work, and even thinking far ahead into the future and trying to make sure that we're planning everything that needs to happen in the fall, right? I mean, I've been living in the fall semester of our university for the last month or so, which seems odd given what's happening in the day to day. And so it's that kind of being separated from oneself and one's temporality seems to be an odd condition of the current pandemic. Whereas the earthquake, or we had it with we were evacuated for the forest fires last fall for 3 or 4 days. And that was like punctual, right? And there it's like very condensed. And when you're evacuated and you're not in your home and everybody's there, time is also different, right? It's like you're in this like cocoon and you're separated from everybody and kind of separated from things. And then you go out into the world and you're like, does anybody know that I'm like evacuated and I'm not living at home? And you're just going about with your daily business, having coffee down the street at the coffee shop. And like, don't you realize what's going on? Right? And this one's feels a little bit more collective because everybody's going through it, right? Yeah. It's like there is no one who hasn't been touched by this, which makes it even kind of a little bit different from these other kind of punctual disasters that seem to be happening.
Absolutely.
Well, that's fantastic. So, I mean, I guess in a final question, like, what are your feelings about the greater Los Angeles arts and cultural landscape? What are your sort of hopes and fears for what we're going to see over the next 12 months, 18 months, 2 years?
I mean, I know LA to be such a resilient city, and I know that as Angelinos, we can't live without our arts and culture organizations, our artists, and Hollywood, of course. And so I know that everything will eventually return to some semblance of what we knew it to be. But I hope that's only the case to a certain degree. I feel like I hope that organizations are doing their own collective internal reflection in this moment and thinking about, is what we do really necessary? Is what we do, suitable for the new world that we're stepping into after this pandemic? And being willing to be, radically honest about that, but also, willing to step into what those new visions will look like as they arise. And I know that many of those big, juicy, brilliant ideas will be coming out of LA with all of the brilliant creative minds who are here. We're in really good hands.
I would agree with that. The more that I've been having these conversations, I think one of the ingredients, it's not the only thing, but one of the ingredients that's been making Los Angeles seem like it has that resilience or its sort of anti-fragility is the capacity for collaboration that was already there, right? This sense that organizations and artists and creative types in LA have kind of always looked beyond their solo careers or their individual organizations or their individual missions and funders and the boundaries of their own activities in order to form relationships and to share audience and to share ideas and to create initiatives that cut across those boundaries. And I think now, as you're seeing the Arts for LA grant and these cross-sector grants and these abilities for people now to work not just across organizations in the arts, but to work across a number of different organizations and a number of different sectors is I mean, I always feel stupid saying this, but it is the thing that it makes LA seem different, right? I mean, it feels different than when I talk to colleagues in New York City or in the United Kingdom, where you have you have wonderful institutions, exceptional people, lots of intelligence, but there's something about the way that those organizations operate where everyone's got their kind of social and infrastructural circle and no one kind of wants to share or see those things overlap. And in LA, and I'm new here, so I'm still just speaking as if I'm a complete outsider. It does seem very different. People are willing to have those, how they can how they can even just coordinate to make sure that the programs aren't interfering with one another, right? And they're not, and there isn't that feeling of sort of defensive crouch or protectionism, which I think is going to be huge going forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, listen, Jazmín, this has been fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't see any questions in our chat window from our audience. So if you have them, we have a little bit of time, and we would love to hear from you as well. I know that it is, particularly it's sort of, does it feel like you're in a transition moment between the spring and the summer? Is this like a moment where it's like, the semester is either ended or ending, the final performance has happened, people are sort of like pulling back on the schedule a little bit? I don't know if you've got faculty who all of a sudden like disappear over the summer months, or they go up to, thought that they were going to go off and do their festivals. But it gives you a kind of a moment of reflection. Is that happening at the conservatory too?
Yeah, so these just couple of weeks is usually our planning time, like late May, early June for fall. But now it's been a fall and summer planning time since we are taking many of our summer programs online this year as well. But yes, it is a small breath between diving into summer programming and planning for fall academic stuff. But yeah, so looking forward to that.
And so I'll ask one other somewhat personal question. Are you getting a chance to perform at all? Are you doing any playing? I know that you've done a little bit of that in the past. You've had some moments where you've found yourself back with family or with friends. Are you doing more of that?
So I'm working on a project right now, actually with Street Symphony, that we actually were going to do in the California Institute for Women in Chino, which unfortunately has just seen a horrible coronavirus outbreak in the last 2 weeks. But we're working on taking that program online, and it's we'll be doing Vivaldi's Gloria, an all-female production of it as it was premiered like 400 years ago by Vivaldi in a girls' orphanage. And so we'll be working on bringing that program online with a virtual chamber orchestra and mariachi.
Amazing. And so you'll be playing.
So I'll be playing, yeah.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. When will that be?
Hopefully late summer.
Okay. We'll have to find out about that. We've got a couple good comments now that have come in, so I'm going to hold you on the line for just a little bit longer.
Oh, sure.
Karina writes in, of course you're inspiring, a big thank you. You mentioned that students get a lot of their funding from these summer festivals. Has Colburn put together relief funding for students? What's been the aid system that Colburn's had to think up in order to support the students beyond what's available from federal and state and county coffers?
Yeah. Yes, we've put together pretty robust relief funding for students, even as they transitioned from the conservatory to various places. Many were not able to get home because they lived in China or Italy,
right.
So they are still staying with Colburn donors, and Colburn gave them meal stipends.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and connected them to instruments. We have, lendings happening from, Berlin Phil in Germany or down in Venezuela. So been figuring out lending programs for pianos and basses and other big instruments. And yes, we're also continuing to employ student workers and trying to give them as many projects as we can, especially for students who we know are of high need right now. But it's definitely been a priority for us, and it came right out of our operating budget. And we now have a sort of GoFundMe happening for the relief funds. But yeah, the school was very thoughtful and generous with how they dealt with students, and so very proud of that.
That's fantastic. That's very generous to have a whole bunch of Colburn funders also housing and having students in their environment. That seems like a fantastic funding opportunity as well going forward, right?
Yeah.
Because you can see a lot of these people, some of them who've got the extra space, perhaps a piano, or wouldn't be opposed to having constant music practiced in their home. You just kind of dig that environment. I don't know if everybody can handle it, but that could be a big deal. We have a question about how's the approach to the career advising changed into the career outlooks? I know you addressed this briefly, but sort of more concretely, when students are heading out into the landscape of trying to land some of those jobs, how's the advising changed?
Well, we're certainly seeing a lot more non-performance resumes. It just as a tactical thing as students begin to consider opportunities outside of just performance or festivals for the summer. But in general, the approach to career advising has, of course, gone fully online and been a lot of sort of virtual coaching, but is something that we're still in conversation, especially with a lot of other institutions, about how they're changing their approach and how they're talking to their students about the possibilities in the future of the field. And we're actually, we belong to the Network of Music Career Development Officers. And Teresa, we should connect about this actually, but I'm on the conference planning committee for that, and we gather in a group of over 100 schools who are represented, both conservatories and music programs that are part of larger institutions, to talk about exactly this, about what kind of offerings we collectively should be bringing to students in this moment, starting to shift that conversation around success like we were discussing, and making space for more non-musical activities to be part of that, whether it's someone's really awesome at video editing or putting together this short web content, being able to lean into that and still see it as success and not whatever it was,
right, a detour, right, or an off path career that wasn't what they had originally imagined for themselves. Yeah, I got to think that there's a way to message that, especially for the really hardcore creative types who imagine themselves as the performers and the artists, to let them know like how valuable their mindset is within other administrative roles, leadership roles, across, they are exactly the types who know how to manage and know and understand the values and the interests of other artists, and so become essential to, as you're familiar, the kind of business and management landscape, either in the commercial or the nonprofit sector, to just be able to have those conversations and to know where those people have come from, know what experiences they've had and what they've dealt with. Because if you don't have that from an early stage in some kind of creative industry and some kind of creative pursuit, it's very hard to sympathize sometimes. It's very hard to understand what's going on in someone's head when they're working from these kind of passion-oriented drives.
Totally.
Well, listen, you're fantastic. This was a great conversation. We really appreciate the time and appreciate you joining us. And we look forward to that big, juicy idea that's going to be coming.
Thank you so much. This was a delight, and it's wonderful to see you. Thank you.
Good to see you as well. Thank you, Jazmín. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you soon. Bye.